Hey there friends, this is The Last Climb. Now today I'm going to tell you about 3 ignorant women who saved for years to climb Everest, thinking it would be just like a fun trip like Disneyland. None of them were reckless, and none of them were unprepared in the way people assume. They had trained, saved, and earned their place on that mountain. But what happened somewhere during the summit push is a horror story you wouldn't ever expect. It was the 23rd of May, 2019, high in the death zone, near the summit of Mount Everest, where 3 young friends from the north of England, who had laughed on camera that the whole thing felt like Disneyland with a queue, ran out of the only 2 things the mountain never gives back, which are oxygen and time. Their names were Maisie Rowley, Tressa Penrose, and Ara Chandler. They were from Leeds, in the north of England, 25, 24, and 22 years old. 3 friends who had known each other since school. The first thing to understand is that they were not rich thrill seekers, and not reckless fools. Maisie was the one who had dreamed it up, the fittest of the 3, a keen runner and hill walker, who had spent years talking about Everest the way other people talk about a wedding, turning someday into a plan. Tressa was the one with the camera always out, funny and warm, and a little vain in the way everyone loved her for, filming everything for a modest following of friends and strangers who adored watching the 3 of them. Ara was the youngest, the quietest, the one who came along mostly because the other 2 were going, and because she could not stand being left behind while her best friends did the biggest thing any of them would ever do. She had been the last to say yes, the most nervous of the 3, and the one who trained the hardest precisely because she was afraid, a detail that matters more than it should, and they were not complete beginners, whatever the internet later assumed. Over several years they had built a real, if modest, climbing resume. A few alpine routes in the Alps, a Himalayan trekking peak, and the thin air of Aconcagua, roughly the background a commercial operator looks for before it will take a client onto Everest. It was enough to get them accepted, and nowhere near enough for what they were walking into, and that gap between enough to be allowed and enough to survive is where this whole story lives. They were not wealthy people. They had saved for years, taken on extra work, run a little fundraiser their town got behind, and signed on with one of the cheaper operators on the mountain because those operators were part of what made the whole thing feel possible for ordinary young women like them. And that, in a single sentence, is the trap this entire story lives inside. Everest had been sold to them, and to many like them, as a thing ordinary people could now buy and be guided up. And in the narrowest sense, that was even true. The part that was not true, the part that would kill all 3 of them, is that being guided up a mountain is not the same as being brought back down it. You can still watch a great deal of their trip because Tressa filmed nearly all of it and posted it in batches whenever the expedition dropped back to the internet at base camp, and the footage is almost unbearably happy to watch now. In one video from base camp, with the tents stretching out behind her and the summit somewhere far above, she laughs into the lens that it feels less like a mountain and more like a theme park, a queue you pay to stand in until it is finally your turn at the top, and the other 2 crowd into frame and agree, delighted with themselves. They were not being stupid when they said it. They were repeating the exact story the modern mountain had told them, the one on every website and every highlight reel, that the ropes were fixed, the route was set, the guides knew every step, and all a person really had to do was be fit and patient enough to wait their turn. Everything in that feed, right down to the final clips, shows 3 young women who believed, to the end, that they had signed up for something hard but survivable. 3 of them started up that mountain together, and I want you to hold on to that number as I go, because the reason all 3 of them died is hidden inside it. You have to understand what Everest has quietly become. It is the highest mountain on Earth, 29,032 feet above the sea, and its summit sits deep in what climbers call the death zone, but the altitude above roughly 26,000 feet, where there is so little oxygen, the body cannot survive long, no matter how fit or young. A person up there is dying by slow degrees, and the only question is whether they can get down before it finishes the job. None of that has changed since the first climbers reached the top. What has changed is everything around it. Where Everest was once the preserve of elite mountaineers, it is now a vast commercial industry, with hundreds of paying clients a season led up fixed ropes by Sherpas who do almost all the truly dangerous work. Prices have fallen, budget operators have multiplied, and the mountain now draws large numbers of people with little real climbing experience, pulled in by the exact story Maisie and Tressa and Ara had believed. You no longer have to be a mountaineer to stand on top of the world. You have to be reasonably fit, able to pay and willing to follow the person in front of you, and an industry now exists to tell you that this is enough. For most people, in most years, it really is enough, which is the seductive part, because most come home with the photograph, and the ones who do not tend to vanish from the marketing. And because every team depends on the same short spells of calm weather, they nearly all push for the summit on the same 2 or 3 days, which produces the single thing that has come to define the modern mountain, and the thing that would kill our 3 friends: a crowd. I have covered a great many of these climbs by now, and this is the one that unsettles me the most, because the 3 of them did almost nothing that the modern version of Everest tells you is wrong. Here is the truly cruel thing about the theme park these 3 thought they had bought a ticket to. A real theme park is built to keep you safe, engineered so that the crowd, the queue, and the staff all exist to protect you and move you gently through the day. On Everest, the crowd, the queue, and the long delays they create can very easily kill you, and even the best guides cannot always save you, and the illusion that they can is what makes the place so lethal. The long line of climbers clipped to a fixed rope looks like order and safety, but a queue in the death zone is really a line of people slowly suffocating while they wait, each burning through a limited supply of oxygen no one can make more of up there. Their lead Sherpa was a quietly formidable, highly experienced climber named Pasang Dorje, working that day alongside 2 assistant Sherpas and the rest of the team, good men doing a near impossible job. A cheaper operator follows the same route and fixed ropes as everyone else, and its Sherpas are no less brave or skilled, but it runs with less held in reserve, fewer reserve cylinders staged along the route, and fewer Sherpas for each client, and on a badly crowded day it is that missing redundancy, not any reckless act, that turns a delay into a catastrophe. And above it sits the one truth the theme park story leaves out, the one no amount of money has ever changed. Up there, past a certain point, no small team can realistically lower a climber who can no longer walk down from near the summit. Not the guides, not the crowd, not the friends who love you more than anything in the world. It has been done on rare occasions, by many hands, and with great luck, but it is so slow and dangerous that it can kill the rescuers too. So if your own legs stop working in the death zone, you are very likely going to die there, and everyone around you is fighting far too hard just to breathe to help. Now most people think Everest kills you with storms and falls, but what killed these 3 was a line of people standing still, and I did not think they ever saw it coming until it already had them. By every account from the Sherpas and from the other climbers who were there, the 3 of them did really well on the way up. They moved slowly but steadily through the lower camps, up through the groaning ice and the long exposed stretches of rope above it, acclimatizing about as well as anyone does, and by the time they reached the last camp on the South Col, everyone on the team, including the 3 of them, believed they would make it. The South Col is already a brutal place, a wind-scoured saddle of ice and old rubbish, and spent oxygen bottles more than 26,000 feet up, where the body can no longer acclimatize and begins to deteriorate, and a person can rest only a few hours before the altitude takes a permanent toll. Nobody stays longer than they must. You arrive, you wait for the dark, and you climb. They set out for the summit late that night, in the deep cold and the black, their headlamps just 3 more points of light in a line snaking up the snow above them, and for the first few hours it was everything they had dreamed. But that same night, almost every other team on the mountain had made the same choice, because the weather window was short and everyone wanted the summit on the same 2 or 3 days. And so, high on the summit ridge, in the thin, killing air, the line of climbers slowed, then stopped, then began to back up on itself, until they were strung out along the fixed ropes in a line that eventually stretched to hundreds, nowhere to go, and nothing to do but wait, in the one place on Earth where waiting is the thing the human body cannot afford. There is footage from that night too, some of it filmed by Tressa herself, and some of it caught by other climbers who were trapped in the very same line. And watching it now, knowing what is coming, is a hard thing to make yourself do. Early on, she is still filming with clumsy frozen fingers, the headlamps strung out beautiful in the dark, her voice muffled and happy behind the oxygen mask, still calling the whole thing incredible. Then the videos change. The camera stops moving, the voices go quiet, and you can see the line of climbers ahead simply standing there, not moving, for minute after minute after minute, in a cold so deep it does not seem to belong to the same planet as the sunny base camp clips. In one of the last clips that survived, the 3 of them are little more than shapes in the dark, one leaning leaning hard on another, and there is nothing on the sound but the wind and the thin hiss of a regulator. Somewhere in those slow frozen hours, in messages that would only be pieced together long afterward, one of them managed a single short message from a small satellite device that reached their families far below, saying only that it was all taking so much longer than anyone had ever told them it would, and that Era was struggling. It is the very last thing that any of the three of them ever sent. Shout out to Mousy, who commented under my last video that all these people on Everest are a dreadful way to treat a mountain, and I think most of you feel it too. What none of us can see, however, is that somewhere in the line, these three women were already running out of time. From the moment the line stopped near the summit ridge, no single person saw every second of what happened. The final reconstruction came from Pasang Dorje's account. The assistant Sherpas, climbers caught in the same queue, the satellite message sent from the ridge, Tressa's recovered footage, and the places where the three women were later found. The delay near the top went on for hours. Hours of standing almost perfectly still in the death zone, clipped to the ropes, the line barely moving, while their oxygen drained away breath by breath, and the cold worked into their hands and feet and their thinking. For people already close to the edge of what their bodies could do, those wasted hours were catastrophic. Every extra hour meant more oxygen gone, more heat leaching from fingers and toes that would never fully recover, more of the brain starvation that steals judgment before anything else. Regulators iced up and had to be cleared, masks slipped and had to be fixed with frozen hands, feet went numb inside stiff boots and crampons, and the first frostbite took hold long before the top. And it was somewhere in that motionless line, still short of the summit, that Era, the youngest of them, the one who had come along so that she would not be left behind, began to fail. She slowed, then stopped responding the way she should, and needed more and more help to stay on her feet. The others almost certainly did not grasp how serious it was at first, because that is how altitude works. It comes on as tiredness and clumsiness and confusion, the feelings of a hard day, until it is suddenly something far worse. In a place run the way the theme park story promises, that would have been the moment the system reached out and caught her. But up there, in the real and indifferent death zone, there was no system to catch anyone. There were only Pasang and his two assistant Sherpas, three men trying to manage three failing clients in a crowd that could barely move, two exhausted friends who would not leave her, and a vast mountain that had started the clock on all three. Look at what a crowd does to a simple plan, because I have seen it turn strong, careful people into statues clipped to a rope, freezing in place while they burn through the air they can never get back. This is the part that breaks my heart, and it is the true heart of the story. When Era began to go under, still short of the summit after all those hours lost in the line, the sensible thing, the thing guides drill into every client, was for the others to leave her with the Sherpas and get down while they still could. Pasang and his Sherpas tried to make that happen. By the accounts of those near them, they told Maisie and Tressa plainly, more than once, to turn around and descend, and Tressa did start down with one of the assistant Sherpas, doing what she had been told. But she could not do it. And after a short way, she turned and climbed back up the same fixed line to her friends. The assistant argued and tried to stop her, but he could not physically force a grown client to keep going down. These were not strangers thrown together on a tour. They had grown up in the same town, they had come all the way up that mountain together, and by everyone who knew them, they were the kind of friends who never left one another behind. And so, only a short distance below a summit they would never reach, they made the choice that doomed them. Maisie and Tressa were still moving under their own power at that point, still able in theory to descend and save themselves, but the hours lost in the queue had already burned through too much oxygen and too much time, and most of the margin they needed to get down was already gone. For a little while it even seemed to be working, because Era got to her feet and moved a few steps on her own, and for a moment the decision to stay looked almost vindicated before she sank down again and did not rise the same way. They stayed with her while Pasang and the assistant Sherpas tried to stretch what oxygen remained, checking regulators, lowering flow rates where they could, and moving cylinders between the women as each one began to fail, all while calling down for more Sherpas who could not reach them before dark. By the time it was undeniable that all three were in mortal trouble, they were far too high, too late, and too spent. The afternoon dying, and another killing night coming down. The loyalty that had defined their whole friendship, the thing everyone who knew them had loved them for, is the one thing the death zone will never allow. Everywhere else in life, you do not leave your friend behind. Up there, near the top of the world. It was the only way any of them might have lived, and not one of them was ever going to be the person who did it. Somewhere in that frozen line, I think the trip stopped being fun and quietly turned into something they could not undo. Because by then, the mountain does not let you simply change your mind and walk away. What was happening to their bodies by then is grimly predictable and worth understanding, because it explains why the way down, not the summit, is where these stories end. Starved of oxygen too long and pushed too many hours, the body and brain begin to fail together. The coordination goes first, so that standing and walking turn clumsy and then impossible. Hands fumbling at a carabiner they can no longer clip, the words turning slurred. The clear thinking goes next, replaced by a spreading confusion and a heavy drowsiness that makes sitting down feel like the most reasonable idea in the world. What the three of them were most likely suffering, in plain terms, was severe oxygen starvation and the bottomless exhaustion of bodies with nothing left. Very possibly, along with the dangerous swelling in the brain that extreme altitude can bring on, all of it made worse by the deep cold once the sun went down and by oxygen bottles running dry. Once the supplemental oxygen is gone at that height, a person breathes air with barely a third of the oxygen they would have at sea level, and the decline is fast. None of it looks the way the films pretend it does. There is no scream, no single cinematic moment of disaster. It is a slow, quiet slide, people gradually losing the ability to keep themselves alive, first the strength, then the coordination, then the will to move at all, and the cruelest part is that by the time it is truly happening, the people it happens to often no longer understand anything is wrong. They simply feel tired and cold and certain that sitting down for a moment will help. Every guide I have ever spoken to repeats the very same brutal rule, that above a certain height, you have to save yourself first. And it is the one rule that the three loyal friends were never once going to follow. And it is almost unbearable to pass along. He stayed far past the point that was safe for himself, swapping cylinders and dropping his own flow to almost nothing, trying to keep them moving, refusing for as long as he could to do the thing the mountain was quietly demanding of him. By his account, they were calm near the end, and mostly past responding, drifting somewhere the altitude had taken them, which is its own small mercy and its own horror. Other climbers, themselves barely surviving, passed the little group on their own desperate way down and could do nothing but remember it. And in the end, the merciless arithmetic of the death zone left Passang the same impossible choice it has left so many Sherpas before him, to stay and die beside the people he could not save, or to go down alone and live. He went down alone. He has said since that it is a night he will never leave behind, and that he is deeply sorry, even though there was never anything for him to be sorry for. Maisie Rowley, Tressa Penrose, and Era Chandler died high on Mount Everest, on the long descent from near the summit, most likely late that afternoon and into the freezing dark, of the combined effects of extreme altitude, exhaustion, and cold. They were found afterward in the same general area, not far apart, having made their last stand the way they had done everything else, which is to say together. Pasang Dorje lived. He got down through the dark to the high camp, frostbitten and hollowed out, carrying the weight of a thing that was never his fault and never will be. Everything we know of their final hours we know only because he survived, and because so many others were trapped in that same line and saw pieces of it. They were not killed by a storm or a fall or any single dramatic disaster of the kind that makes the news. They were killed by a crowd, by a clock, and by a story that promised them over and over that a mountain was something it has never once actually been, which is safe. Their bodies could not be brought down, at least not then. Everest keeps most of those it takes high on its frozen slopes, because any recovery from the death zone is so dangerous it can cost the lives of the living. And so the three of them remained a long time where they had come to rest, near the roof of the world. What did come down was the story, pieced together from Pasang, from the dozens of climbers stuck in that line who never forgot it, from the footage on one of Tressa's cameras, which another expedition recovered months later among the abandoned equipment on the mountain, from the messages already sent, and from the careful work of the people whose job it is to make sense of these things afterward. That season was one of the deadliest the mountain had seen in years, with climber after climber dying, not in some dramatic avalanche, but simply of exhaustion and altitude and time lost, standing in line, and a single photograph taken that week showing a long snaking line of hundreds queuing along the summit ridge against a perfect blue sky went around the world and became the defining image of what Everest had turned into. Somewhere inside a version of that line, though no one watching the news at home would have known it, were three ordinary friends from Leeds who had cheerfully called the whole thing Disneyland and who were already quietly running out of time. Nobody was ever coming to carry them down, and that is the piece the theme park story always leaves out. The piece I wish, with everything in me, that the three of them had understood before they ever left home. I have thought a long time about who to be angry at in this story, and the honest answer is that there is no villain in it, which is somehow worse. They were not fools. They were brave and loyal and careful, and the loyalty that killed them is the very thing that made them worth loving. Pasang Dorje was not careless. He very nearly died trying to save three people the mountain had already chosen to keep. Even the operator and the crowd and the whole machine that now sells the highest place on earth as a bucket list item, none of it set out to hurt a single soul. The thing that killed them was quieter than any villain. It was an idea, a comforting and enormously profitable and deadly idea. That a mountain can be tamed, that danger can be bought away, that if enough people are all doing a thing at once, then it must surely be safe. Everest is not Disneyland. It never was. And no amount of money or marketing or fixed rope will ever make it so. And three young women from Leeds paid the whole price for believing, with almost everyone else, that it just might be. It's insane how gentle and how bright the whole mountain looks in the very last videos. Because I promise you there was nothing gentle about what it was already quietly doing to them. I do not tell this story to mock three young women who cannot answer back, because there is nothing to mock in Maisie, Tressa, and Era, and nothing to celebrate in how they died. I tell it because their deaths carry a warning that has little to do with mountains. When the whole world tells you that something frightening has been made safe, that the crowd has smoothed the danger away, that all you must do is pay and follow the line, it is worth remembering that some things cannot be tamed, only survived. And even then, only sometimes. They were told a mountain was a theme park. They believed it, because very nearly everyone around them believed it too. And they climbed, and laughed, and filmed all of it, and stayed together to the end, and the mountain did with them exactly what it has always done with people who mistake a crowd for safety. The saddest part is not that they were reckless, because they were not. It is that they were told a lie so many times, by so many people, that in the end it looked just like the truth.